Today, I bring you a powerful 7-part story. One that will take you from comfort to challenge, from weakness to strength, and finally, to wisdom. So stay with us through every part, because the ending will give you a lesson you will never forget. Welcome to English Story Haven, a place where stories are more than just words. They are lessons, mirrors of life that help us grow. Today, we begin the journey of a young man who thought life would always be simple, until one moment changed everything. Daniel lived a life that many could only dream of. His father, Mr. Richard, was a wealthy businessman who worked tirelessly to build his empire. But Daniel never thought about the effort behind that success. For him, wealth was just another part of life, like the air he breathed. Expensive clothes filled his closet, shiny cars waited in the driveway, and the latest phones were always in his hands. He did not study hard, he did not work, and he never worried about the future. Every morning, Daniel woke up late, usually long after the sun had risen. Breakfast was already waiting for him, delivered to his bed by the house staff. The rest of the morning often slipped away in idle comfort, scrolling through his phone, watching television, or planning where to go with his friends. His friends admired his easy life, often telling him, "You're lucky, Daniel. Most of us worry about exams, money, or work, but you have everything without effort." Daniel laughed at their worries. He believed that as long as his father was alive, life would remain this effortless paradise. Afternoons were usually spent in the city with his closest companion, Mark. Together they explored the finest restaurants, where waiters greeted Daniel with practiced smiles, knowing he always tipped generously with his father's money. They wore designer clothes, drove expensive sports cars, and lived as though the world belonged to them. For Daniel, life was not about building, it was about consuming. Whenever he saw something new in a store window, he didn't think twice. He would simply say, "I'll take it," and the item became his. At night, the story was no different. Parties, late dinners, and endless laughter filled his time. His friends admired him, not for his character or skills, but for his wealth. Daniel never noticed the emptiness in those friendships. He only cared that people surrounded him, that the music played, and that he never had to think about tomorrow. To him, tomorrow did not exist, was always about today. One evening, however, the easy rhythm of his life shifted. Daniel returned home late, humming a tune from the party he had just left, when he found his father waiting in the study. Mr. Richard was not a man of many words, but his silence spoke volumes. His face was serious, his eyes sharper than usual. Daniel tried to brush it off with a smile. "Father, you're still awake." "Don't worry, I'm fine," he said casually, dropping into a chair. But his father didn't smile. He looked at Daniel for a long moment before saying quietly, "Sit down, son. We need to talk." Daniel frowned. His father never used that tone. It was too heavy, too serious. Still, he sat, curiosity mixing with a small ripple of unease. Mr. Richard folded his hands, leaned forward, and said, "Daniel, you are not a child anymore. You must start thinking about your future." Daniel laughed softly. "Future, father, why worry? You've given me everything. I don't need to think about tomorrow. Life is good as it is." But Mr. Richard did not laugh. He shook his head slowly, his expression grave. You think life will always be like this, but you are wrong. One day, I may not be here. And when that day comes, what will you do? The question cut deeper than Daniel expected. For the first time, he didn't have an answer. He looked at his father, waiting for the usual reassurance. But there was none. Mr. Richards' voice was steady, unshaken. Life won't always be this easy, Daniel. Sooner or later, you must learn what it means to earn, not just spend. Daniel sat in silence. The music of the party was gone, the laughter of his friends forgotten. For the first time, he felt a seed of doubt in his perfect, comfortable world. Part 1 Recap. Daniel lived a spoiled, comfortable life, always spending and never working. His father, Mr. Richard, finally sat him down and warned, "Life won't always be this easy. One day I won't be here, and then what will you do?" For the first time, Daniel began to feel uneasy about his future. Story Part 2. The first lesson. The next morning, Daniel expected life to return to normal. He woke up late, stretched in his soft bed, and reached for his phone. His friends had already sent him messages. "Let's meet for lunch. Big sale at the mall today. Are you coming?" Daniel smiled, dressing in his newest shirt and expensive perfume. Life was still easy, or so he thought, as he walked downstairs. He found his father waiting in the living room. Mr. Richards' face was serious again. "Come with me," he said, his voice leaving no room for questions. "Father, I have plans." Daniel protested, but his father was already walking toward the car. With a frustrated sigh, Daniel followed. The ride was strangely silent. Daniel expected small talk or music, but Mr. Richard kept his eyes on the road. Outside, the city looked different that morning. Daniel noticed people walking quickly, some with tired eyes and worn-out clothes. He frowned. He had never really paid attention before. Finally, Mr. Richard stopped the car in a crowded part of the city Daniel had never visited. The streets were narrow, the air heavy with dust and smoke. Small stalls lined the sidewalks, vendors calling out to customers. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Why are we here?" he asked. His father pointed to a man pushing a cart full of fruit. The man's face was lined with sweat and exhaustion. "Look at him," Mr. Richards said. "He wakes up before dawn, works until nightfall, and still earns just enough to feed his family. He does not complain. He does not rest. He works because he must." Daniel swallowed, unsure how to respond. He had never thought about men like this. A few blocks away, they stopped again. Mr. Richard guided Daniel into a small shop where an elderly woman sat bent over a sewing machine. Her fingers moved quickly, stitching clothes with practiced skill. Her back was hunched, her eyes weary, but she did not stop. "Alina," Mr. Richard said softly, "has been working for more than 40 years. She does not have much money, but she survives because she works every single day." Daniel stared at the woman. She barely looked up, too focused on her task to notice them. He felt a strange heaviness in his chest. He thought about his own mornings spent in bed, about the hours he wasted doing nothing while people like Alina fought just to survive. As they returned to the car, Daniel's father looked at him. "Do you see, my son? Life is not easy for everyone. Some struggle every day just to eat. And yet you, who have everything, have never worked a single day." Daniel turned his face to the window, unable to meet his father's eyes. For the first time, Guilt crept into his heart. He had always believed comfort was natural, that money simply existed. But now, those images, the fruit seller, Alina hunched over her sewing machine, stayed in his mind like shadows he couldn't escape. They drove back in silence. Daniel didn't touch his phone, didn't think of his friend's messages. He only thought of the sweat dripping from the man's brow, the tired hands of the old woman, and his father's words, "You have never worked a single day." Something inside him shifted that day. He couldn't name it yet, but for the first time in his life, Daniel felt small. Part 2 Recap. Mr. Richard took Daniel through the poorer parts of the city. Daniel saw a fruit seller working from dawn to night and an old woman named Alina sewing clothes endlessly. For the first time, Daniel felt guilt and realized that while others struggled for survival, he had never worked a single day in his life. Story Part 3. The first day of work. The next morning felt unusual for Daniel. He was used to sleeping late, but today he woke to the sound of his father's voice calling him downstairs. With heavy steps, he entered the kitchen, expecting his usual breakfast spread. Instead, Mr. Richard handed him a small brown bag. "Your lunch," his father said. Daniel blinked in surprise. "Lunch? Can't I just eat at a restaurant?" Mr. Richard shook his head. "Workers bring their own food. And today, Daniel, you are a worker." The words struck him like a blow. A worker, him. Before Daniel could argue, his father was already heading for the car. With a groan, Daniel followed. Unlike the luxury outings he once enjoyed, this ride was different. They stopped in front of Mr. Richard's tall office building, bustling with activity. Businessmen rushed through the doors, assistants carried stacks of papers, phones rang endlessly. For Daniel, this was just the place he visited when he needed money from his father. But today, it would become something else entirely. Mr. Richard didn't take Daniel to his grand office on the top floor. Instead, he led him into a small, crowded room filled with desks and buzzing computers. Workers typed furiously, eyes glued to screens. The air was thick with the sound of ringing phones and clicking keyboards. "This is Mr. William," his father said, introducing a tall man with sharp glasses and a firm expression. "From today, you will work under him." Daniel's mouth dropped open. "Work here?" "Father, I don't know anything about this." But Mr. Richard didn't answer. He gave a single nod to Mr. William and walked away, leaving his son behind. Mr. William adjusted his glasses and looked Daniel over with cool detachment. "Follow me," he said. His voice carried no warmth. Daniel trailed after him through the maze of desks until they stopped at a small corner desk piled high with papers. Mr. William placed a heavy stack in front of him. "Check these reports, find the mistakes, mark them, be quick about it." Daniel stared at the mountain of documents, horrified. "All of these, yes," Mr. William replied without blinking. Then he turned and walked away. Daniel sat down slowly. He picked up the first page, covered in numbers and lines of text. At first he thought it would be easy, but after only an hour, the numbers began to blur, his head throbbed, and his eyes grew tired. He leaned back in the chair, tempted to give up. Yet, everywhere he looked, workers were busy, focused, determined, never stopping. Nobody complained, nobody rested. Daniel felt trapped. By lunchtime, his body already ached, He opened his brown paper bag and found a simple sandwich and an apple. He looked around the room. Everyone else had similar lunches. They ate quickly, quietly, and then went right back to work. There were no fancy meals, no laughter-filled conversations like Daniel was used to with his friends. It was plain, practical, and real. He missed his old life. He missed the freedom, the luxury, the sense of ease. But as he chewed his sandwich in silence, he also felt something he had never felt before: respect. These men and women worked so hard every single day, without complaint. And now, for the first time, he was one of them. The afternoon was even harder. His hands grew stiff from writing, his back sore from sitting too long. When Mr. William came to check his work, Daniel hoped for approval. Instead, Mr. William frowned. Too many mistakes. Do it again. Daniel's pride burned. He wanted to argue, to shout that he didn't belong here, but something held him back. Instead, he nodded quietly and picked up the papers again. When the day finally ended, Daniel felt drained. He dragged himself out of the building, his head pounding, his body aching. And yet, when he saw his father waiting outside, something unexpected happened. Mr. Richard didn't ask, "How was your day?" He simply smiled. And for the first time in his life, Daniel smiled back, not out of comfort or laziness, but out of something new, something unfamiliar. It was pride. Part 3 Recap. Mr. Richard dropped Daniel at his office. Not to sit in luxury, but to actually work under Mr. William. Daniel spent the day checking reports, making endless mistakes, eating a simple lunch, and struggling with exhaustion. By the end of the day, though tired, he felt a new sense of pride, his first small taste of real work. Story. Part 4 Lessons from the workers. The next morning, Daniel woke up before his alarm. His body ached from yesterday's work, but something inside pushed him to rise early. It was strange. He, who once stayed in bed until noon, was now rushing to be ready on time. When he entered the office, Mr. William barely glanced at him. "Good. You're not late," he said. His tone was flat, but Daniel caught the faintest hint of approval. The work began again. Stacks of papers, endless numbers, and sharp eyes scanning for errors. At first, Daniel still struggled. He missed things, confused calculations, and sometimes lost focus. Each time, Mr. William corrected him firmly. "Pay attention, Daniel. Mistakes cost money. In this office, there's no room for carelessness." The words stung, but Daniel forced himself to push harder. He read more carefully, double-checked his notes, and tried to keep up with the rhythm of the others. Slowly, painfully, he began to understand. By lunchtime, he carried his brown bag to the break room. The space was small, filled with chatter and the clinking of lunchboxes. At first, Daniel felt out of place. Everyone else seemed to know each other. He sat in the corner, quietly eating his sandwich. Then, one of the workers, a broad-shouldered man with tired eyes, sat across from him. "You're the boss's son, aren't you?" he asked. Daniel flushed, ready for mocking, but the man simply smiled. "Don't worry, we've all made mistakes on our first day. You'll get better." Slowly, others joined the conversation. A woman named Clara talked about waking up at 5 a.m. to prepare her kids for school before coming to work. Another worker, James, shared how he was saving every penny to pay for his mother's medical bills. They spoke not with bitterness, but with quiet determination. Daniel listened, fascinated. These people carried heavy burdens, yet faced them with strength. He realized that while he had complained about the simplest discomforts, these workers fought daily battles far greater than anything he had known. When lunch ended, he returned to his desk with a new mindset. He worked harder, not just for himself, but because he respected the people around him. If they could endure so much and still stay strong, then he had no excuse. The days passed, and though Daniel still made mistakes, something was changing. His hands grew steadier, his eyes sharper, his patience stronger. He no longer dreaded the sound of Mr. Williams' footsteps behind him. Instead, he waited for feedback, ready to improve. One evening, as he left the office, Clara called out to him. "Good work today, Daniel. You're learning fast." It was a simple compliment, but it lit a spark inside him. He smiled genuinely, feeling something deeper than pride. It was belonging. For the first time, Daniel was not just the rich man's son. He was part of a team. That night, when he returned home, Mr. Richard noticed the change. His son's clothes were wrinkled, his hands ink-stained, but his eyes, they were brighter. "You're beginning to understand, aren't you, Mr. Richard asked softly. Daniel nodded, his voice steady. "Yes, Father, I think I am." Part 4 Recap. Daniel kept working under Mr. William. Though he struggled, he began to learn discipline. At lunch, he sat with the workers Clara James and others who shared their real-life struggles. Their strength inspired him, and slowly Daniel started to change. He felt a sense of belonging and began to respect hard work. Story Part 5. The big test. The weeks passed, and Daniel was no longer the same careless boy who once wasted his days. He woke early, worked long hours, and even stayed late when necessary. The workers began to see him not as the boss's spoiled son, but as someone who was genuinely trying. One morning, however, Mr. William approached his desk with a thick folder. His eyes were sharp behind his glasses. "Daniel," he said, placing the folder down, "this project is yours." Daniel froze. "Mine?" "Yes. A client needs a financial report by tomorrow. Accurate numbers, clear presentation, no mistakes. You'll handle it." Daniel's heart raced. This was not a simple stack of papers, it was an actual responsibility. He nodded, though his hands trembled slightly. "I'll do my best," he said. From that moment, the day felt heavier than any before. He pored over the numbers, double-checking calculations, writing notes, and drafting charts. But the pressure was immense. By evening, his desk was covered in crumpled pages. No matter how hard he tried, mistakes kept slipping through. At one point, overwhelmed, he buried his head in his hands. "I can't do this," he muttered. Just then, Clara passed by and noticed his frustration. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Don't give up, Daniel. None of us were perfect on our first project. You just have to keep going." James added with a smile, "Remember why you're here. You're not proving yourself to your father, you're proving it to yourself." Their words lifted him. Taking a deep breath, Daniel pushed the papers aside and started again. This time, he worked slower, steadier. He remembered Mr. Williams' advice: pay attention, no room for carelessness. The hours stretched into the night. His eyes burned, his fingers cramped, but he didn't stop. For the first time in his life, he fought through exhaustion without giving in. By dawn, the report was finally complete. Every number checked, every page neat. Daniel held it in his hands, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and pride. When he handed it to Mr. William later that morning, the older man flipped through it silently. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, he set the folder down and looked at Daniel. "Better," he said simply. "Still room to improve, but better." The words were not overly kind, yet they meant more to Daniel than all the praise he had ever received in his life. He had earned them. That evening, as he walked out of the office, Clara and James gave him encouraging nods. "See," Clara said. "You're learning." Daniel smiled, tired but deeply satisfied. For the first time, he realized something important. The true value of work was not in money or luxury, it was in the effort, the growth, and the quiet respect earned from others. Part 5 Recap. Daniel faced his first big responsibility, a full financial report. At first, he struggled and almost gave up, but with encouragement from Clara and James, he pushed through the night and completed it. Mr. Williams' short praise better felt like the biggest achievement of Daniel's life. For the first time, he understood the value of hard work. Story, Part 6. A new rolled Daniel's days slowly began to follow a rhythm. He woke early, worked long hours, and no longer complained about the simple lunches or the heavy workload. Instead, he welcomed the challenges. Each mistake became a lesson, each correction a step forward. The other workers noticed his change. Clara often smiled at his determination, while James began asking him for help with small tasks. Even Mr. William, who rarely showed emotion, started giving Daniel more responsibility. One day, as Daniel was busy checking reports, Mr. William appeared at his desk. "Daniel," he said, "I want you to assist the team with tomorrow's presentation. You'll explain the numbers to the clients." Daniel's eyes widened. "Me, present?" "Yes," Mr. William replied firmly. "You've studied the reports, you understand them. Now prove it." That night, Daniel sat at his small desk at home, practicing in front of a mirror. He stumbled at first, forgetting words and losing confidence. His father walked in quietly and watched him. "Nervous?" he asked. Daniel nodded. "I don't want to embarrass myself for you." His father placed a hand on his shoulder. "Remember, son, leadership is not about being perfect. It's about standing up, speaking with honesty, and giving your best. The rest will follow." The next morning, Daniel walked into the meeting room. The clients sat in polished suits, waiting. His palms sweated, but when Mr. William nodded at him to begin, Daniel stood tall. He explained the charts, pointed to figures, and answered questions. His voice shook at first, but slowly grew steady. When he finished, there was silence. Then, one client nodded approvingly. "Well explained," the man said. Relief washed over Daniel. He had done it. After the meeting, Mr. William gave him a rare look of approval. "Not bad," he said, which to Daniel felt like a medal of honor. As weeks passed, Daniel's role shifted from a passive worker to someone who supported his colleagues. When James struggled with a complicated report, Daniel stayed late to help him. When Clara looked exhausted, Daniel offered to take some of her tasks. Slowly, the team began to trust him. One evening, as he left the office, Clara said, "You know, Daniel, you're not just working anymore. You're becoming part of us. That's something money can't buy." Those words stayed with him. He realized that true respect came not from wealth, but from being reliable, helpful, and willing to shoulder responsibility. At home, his father noticed the change as well. Daniel no longer asked for luxuries or wasted hours with friends who only cared for fun. Instead, he came home tired but fulfilled, often sharing stories of his day at work. His father listened silently, pride shining in his eyes. Daniel now understood something powerful. Work was not just about earning money. It was about building character, earning trust, and becoming someone others could rely on. Here's the final part, part 7 of your story, with the conclusion and life lesson for your viewers. Story part 7. The final lesson. Months passed, and Daniel was no longer the same boy who once wasted his father's wealth without a thought. He had changed slowly, painfully, but surely. He worked hard, helped his colleagues, and earned the quiet respect of Mr. William, Clara, James, and even the other workers who once doubted him. One evening, Daniel's father called him into his office. The room was quiet, filled with the soft ticking of a clock. His father studied him for a long moment before finally speaking. "Daniel," he said, his voice calm, "when you first came here, you were lazy, careless, and blind to the struggles of others. But now," he paused, a proud smile forming. "Now, you've changed." Daniel lowered his head. "I didn't understand before, Father. I thought life was just about comfort and spending money. But work has taught me discipline, patience, and respect." His father opened a drawer and pulled out a small silver key. He placed it in Daniel's hand. "This is for you. It's your office now. You've earned it." Daniel stared at the key, his eyes wide.